You're listening to WHFH 88.5 FM Flossmoor. I am Tim Van Eden, the host of today's interview, and today we have a great guest on, a teacher here at Homewood Flossmoor High School, a past nuclear engineer, a graduate from NC State, and also on the board here of HF trying to redesign the way students learn. This is Joseph Muller. Mr. Muller, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to have you on, and this awesome topic of just redesigning the way students learn. And so I have a few deep questions here. Hope you can answer well.
Yeah, awesome. Before we get to that, I just want to say this setup is absolutely awesome. What you guys got going on here is really cool.
Yeah, today we were on CBS, actually. I don't know if I showed you, but it was awesome.
Yeah, you guys deserve it.
So I'm glad to show it off a little bit whenever I can, you know. So first, just a little question. What classes have you taught, and what are you teaching here at HF now?
Yeah, so I've taught a project lead the way class my first year here, kind of introduction to engineering. I teach some physics classes, and then the class I have you in that's a lot of fun is a dual enrollment class we call college engineering. It's with Illinois Institute of Technology, and it's kind of like their engineering 101 class.
Yeah, so it's with IIT, correct?
Yeah, it's through IIT, so the students get credit for engineering 101 through IIT, and then, yep.
So AP class, but mix of AP and honors more, right?
Yeah,
more
yeah.
As I stated, you were a nuclear engineer. Can you go in a little more in depth on that job and what that was all like before teaching?
Yeah, for sure. So I was a nuclear engineer out in South Carolina. I worked for Westinghouse after I went to NC State. So my actual title would have been like a nuclear core design engineer. But mainly what I did is every 18 months, they have to refuel the nuclear reactors. They have to shuffle the fuel around in a little bit. Mm-hmm. So what I had to do is we would use physics equations to kind of create simulations on what would happen. And then we use programming to kind of throw data in, run those simulations. And the whole kind of idea of just refueling the reactors, you're trying to maximize electricity you get out of it while minimizing cost and then staying within the safety guidelines. So there's a little bit of a design factor to it because you're playing with multiple variables at once. Yeah. So really a lot of computer programming. One of the things I did towards the end that was pretty cool is we were trying to maximize heavy hydrogen production, which doesn't sound too crazy, but that's kind of what they use in military weapons.
That does sound pretty crazy. It sounds crazy to me. So
yeah, so that's more military weapon use and stuff like that. But happy to be at HF now.
Yeah,
this is the home.
So going from that to now being a teacher here, it's just a little bit of switch, but it all stays in the same relative spectrum of being an engineer and trying to take on the world's problems, as we talk about all the time in our class. So just what does that take? What is the difference between going from a nuclear engineer into being a teacher?
Yeah, so one of the biggest differences is just trying, because engineers are obviously passionate about science and improving the future and everything around them. Just probably the biggest difference is trying to pass that passion on to the next generation of students. Because as an engineer, you can make, and I mean, I'm trying to get a lot of my students to be engineers. I think it's a great job, but you can make a certain amount of change. But if you can influence a lot more people to then become engineers, I kind of see it as it could be a little bit more exponential that way. And rather just me doing engineering and making a change now, maybe I have 200, 300, 400, 500 students going out there making a change. So.
Yeah. So teaching people how to make change almost.
Yeah, definitely. And just kind of inspiring them. And the biggest thing is like letting them know they could do it. Like especially things like nuclear engineering or engineering in general. It seems when you're 16, man, that seems like a tall task and it seems like a lot, but just letting them know like, hey, you can do this.
We actually have a caller on here with a question. Could you state your question and name, please?
Hey, Mr. Muller. I'm Sank Terror and a junior here at HF. My question to you would be, what is the largest problem with how students learn in 2024?
Oh, well, thank you for the question. I think that was Taryn. Sorry if I didn't get that name right.
Sank, I believe. He's in VTV, actually.
Okay.
Might be listening in.
That's a really good question. I'm going to give you an answer that maybe a lot of kids won't like, but I'm going to be honest, a big problem with how students learn starts with the students. And I know in a generation where sometimes we like to think it's everyone else's fault, but just after being a teacher a few years, now this isn't every student, but there's a good portion of students, I know it's not just at our school, but they just don't take learning serious in general. I feel like there's kind of a cultural movement of, hey, if I don't need this for my career, if I don't need this for my job, then it's not necessarily important. And I think we're kind of losing sight that learning is valuable intrinsically. So I think that's kind of a big issue. And then I also think as a culture and with students now, we're getting confused between having knowledge and having information.
Yeah.
We have the most information we've ever had, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're knowledgeable. Because being able to be knowledgeable, then you can critically think, you can look at things from different perspectives, but that means you already have to have some of the information in you when you're looking at new things to be able to critically think. It's not like people are just going out and looking up counterpoints and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of one of the issues as well.
I actually kind of feel this as a student with having classes I don't like enjoy completely. Like I feel that I don't have a major, and it's kind of hard to focus and pay attention in those classes. But at the end of the day, it's all about problem solving and keep making your brain, like just challenge your brain almost. And when you're just sitting there on your phone in the classes and you do that 4 to 5 hours a day for 5 days a week, yeah, you can see why it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I'll put some of it on us teachers as well. Like I don't think we do a great job sometimes at articulating the value of learning. So some of that's for sure on us. I think one of the things you could let me know if you feel like this in class sometimes too, is I think we have like a depth versus breadth issue with education as well. So one of the things is we try to cover so many different topics in education that we end up walking away not really remembering any much of it, right?
Yeah.
When it's realistically like if you had the option to cover 100 topics, but then the students only learn 10 because they're spread so thin, versus covering 60 topics and then the students learn 40, which one would we take? We would probably say whichever one the student walks out with more, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we constantly make this other decision of adding more to the plate, more to the plate, more to the plate, and it kind of spreads students thin and they kind of throw in the towel at a certain point.
Agreed. Based on that, what you just kind of stated right there, can you go into how you want to change from what we do now with learning and how it's all grade-based and everything to being more mastery learning, and what does that like mean even?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic in education, and it's not a new topic, but it kind of goes back and forth. So the dichotomy here is kind of between traditional learning and mastery learning, and what it really comes down to is when do we have the students move on to the next topic, and how do we evaluate them? So so what we do now is we would probably call a little bit more traditional learning, and we keep everybody on the same pace. You know this, hey, the first 2 weeks we're doing unit 1, then we're all moving on to unit 2, then we're all moving on to unit 3. So I'd like to take a second to just kind of explain the issue with that. The issue is the learning gaps that build up throughout that time. So to just kind of make it a little bit more concrete, imagine you have someone, we'll take you for example, Tim. So imagine unit 1 comes by, you get a 70% on the unit 1 test, and we say, all right, sorry, Tim, we're moving on to unit 2.
You get a C.
Yeah, you got a C. You're passing though.
Yeah,
C's get degrees, right? But we're saying, all right, you're passing, you're good, you move on to the next unit. But now when it comes to unit 2, to understand unit 2, you have to learn all of unit 2 plus that 30% you missed from unit 1. So now learning unit 2 is harder for you because you have to learn more. Plus it's harder for you to learn it because you don't know some of it already. So that's what we call learning gaps adding up. And then what happens in the traditional styles, those keep adding up, and it's kind of like a house of cards. You're building on a foundation that's
Soon
not
enough it's gonna break.
Exactly. And then that's why when you hear these kids going, oh, algebra 2 is way too hard for me. No, that's not the case. It's just we allow these gaps to build up. And then it's kind of funny, like we wouldn't do that in any other industry. Imagine if we had to build a house. I was teaching you how to do construction and building the house, and I'm like, all right, this is how you lay the foundation of the house. This is how you put up the drywall. This is how you put up this. Imagine if you just learned 70% of each of those skills, and I said, okay, well, we did that for 2 weeks. We're moving on. Okay, now build me a house. I don't want that person building me a house, right? So the opposite of that would be more so a mastery learning. And what that would say is, okay, you're not moving on to the next subject until you show me mastery of the subject you're on now. So that would be about like 95% to 100% correct. And then, and it's kind of funny, we do this in a lot of different industries, but we don't really notice it. Like think of like martial arts, right? So martial arts, you go until mastery and then you move on to the next one.
Exactly. Belts.
Yeah.
Colors.
Think of, for example, like learning an instrument. If I was like, hey, you have to learn this song on the guitar and you only learned 70% of it and you weren't doing well on the other 30%, I wouldn't just say, all right, let's go to the next song.
You're missing notes.
Yeah.
You don't know how to do the song completely then.
Yeah, we would finish up that song until we moved on to the next one. So there's the data on this actually shows that even if kids take longer at the beginning of time, they end up getting through it quicker in the long run because they don't have those learning gaps. And yeah, the data on it's pretty good. And then the one thing I do want to say about this, though, is this is kind of the first time in history where it's actually kind of feasible to do this. The traditional model made sense because we didn't have technology where we can kind of control the pace of each student learning. We were kind of limited by textbooks and desks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we had to keep people on the same kind of timeline. But
Exactly. So now with technology, and that is kind of a question I had, but first we have another caller here. So could you state your name also and the question you have?
Hey, I'm Douglas Austin, and I'm really interested in this topic, so I just have a quick question. Why do you want to make so much change, and does it really benefit or affect you?
yeah, thanks, Dustin. So this is an interesting one, and I feel like this is a perspective that maybe some people have today, but maybe it's getting lost a little bit. But really why I want to make a change is rooted in gratitude. I really like to think of things in historical standards and historical perspectives, and like things weren't always very nice, right? Life kind of really stunk for most of history, and people worked really hard to get us to the point where we're at today. And a lot of times the way we view history now is kind of a lot of evil people and different things like that. But I think we need to take a step back and kind of be grateful that, hey, we are not starving anymore. We're not freezing to death. We're not dying in house fires, stuff like that. Like people worked really hard to get us where we're at. So I feel some sort of sense of responsibility to pay it back to those people, along with make things better for the next generation, like leave things better than how we found them. So I feel I really have a responsibility to do that. So I'm trying to do that through,
I like that.
create a generation of STEM students that can, improve things for us.
Take on the world problems that we have today, now that are completely different from any other generation ever, pretty much.
Yeah.
We have one of our biggest problems in the U.S. is having too much food. Like, diabetes and just obesity in all, and I feel like that's never been a problem ever.
Yeah.
So it's just crazy, new problems.
Yeah, and we need people that look at things from a big picture perspective and want to address things, because the easier route to take is, as long as I'm okay, then I'll be okay. And one thing I've always kind of been told is, if you can keep your life in order and you can have a good family and look out for them, and if you can, then you stretch it out to your community and look out for your community and make change at your community. And I really think the community level is the best place to kind of make change. So that's kind of where I'm at, I'm trying to make change at the community level in STEM, and hopefully it's going well.
Well, Mr. Muller, thank you very much. And I think that helped a lot of people taught a lot of people too on just what's the difference between what we do now with regular learning versus mastery and just everything. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And just one quick final point. I know I was a little bit negative about education at certain points. I just want you to know, like, we're having all these conversations with administration and things like that, and HF is really on top of things. So I think we're really going to be at the forefront of making some of these changes.
And I love that. I'm glad that I'm at this school, and not only that, just in this community. So thank you very much for coming on, and I'm glad you got to talk about what you love and enjoy and what you're doing for a job.
Thank you. It was a blast.
Of course. You're listening to WHFH 88.5 FM Flossmoor, and I'm Tim Van Eden. This is